"The house is full. You should go tonight." Those were the words my daughter-in-law Mila hissed at me as she dropped my old suitcase by the door. My own children stood behind her, silent, their faces turned away. The smell of roasted turkey and cinnamon drifted through the warm living room, but I was standing in the cold air of the porch, a guest in the home I had worked all my life to build. My son Russell avoided my eyes, muttering, "Mom, don't make a scene. It's Christmas Eve." His wife tightened her grip on the doorknob as if every second I lingered was an inconvenience. Danielle, my daughter, bit her lip, but said nothing. I froze. I had never imagined that the same children I carried, fed, and sacrificed everything for would one day shove me out like an unwanted visitor, especially tonight under the glow of Christmas lights. Guests laughed around the decorated tree, unaware of the humiliation unfolding at the front door. The suitcase was heavy, not because of clothes, but because of the weight of betrayal. Snowflakes clung to my coat as if trying to comfort me, while behind the closed curtain, shadows of my family moved without me. My little grandson Jaden's voice cracked through the silence. "Grandma, please don't go." His small hand tried to reach mine, but Russell pulled him back. My heart split in two at that sight. I stepped off the porch, my shoes crunching on frozen ground. My children had just exiled me on the holiest night of the year, and in that bitter moment I thought I had lost everything. But they didn't know I still held one last gift. My name is Loretta Gaines. I am 67 years old, a black woman who has lived her entire life in Baltimore, Maryland. For more than 4 decades, I worked as a seamstress and housekeeper. My hands carried the marks of long nights hemming dresses, scrubbing floors, and patching clothes so my children could have shoes on their feet and food on the table. I became a widow 10 years ago, when my husband Charles passed suddenly from a heart attack. He left me with grief, a modest pension, and a letter written in his careful handwriting. In it, he urged me to guard the house we bought together, the only true asset we ever owned. He called it our fortress. "Loretta, don't let anyone push you out." At the time, I thought his warning was unnecessary. I trusted my children completely. Raising Russell and Danielle was never easy. I took in extra shifts to cover their school trips, their prom suits, their college tuition. Many nights I went without new clothes for myself, just to make sure Russell had the basketball shoes he wanted, or Danielle could join the choir tour with her classmates. Every decision I made circled back to them. Their happiness was my mission. Neighbors often whispered, "Loretta, you work too hard," but I believed sacrifice was what motherhood demanded. I wore my tiredness like a badge of honor, proof that I was giving everything for the family name. Even when my back ached and my eyesight dimmed, I refused to stop working until both children had stable jobs and homes of their own. When Russell married Mila, I told myself to be patient with her sharp tongue. I wanted peace more than pride. When Danielle brought home Kyle, who seemed careless about responsibilities, I kept my criticisms inside. I thought if I showed only kindness, they would return it in time. I was wrong. Over the years, subtle cracks widened into something colder. I noticed Russell stopped asking my advice. Mila decided what gatherings I could attend. Danielle, once affectionate, began to echo her husband's dismissive tone. I brushed it off as generational differences. But the truth was, sharper, my children had begun to see me as a burden rather than a mother. Yet even as their distance grew, my grandson Jaden was my light. At 7 years old, his hugs were fierce, his laughter pure. He would run into my arms shouting "Grandma" as if I were the only person who could make his world safe. In his eyes, I was still important, still loved. That's why Christmas Eve hurt so deeply. I had spent weeks knitting Jaden a red scarf, just like the one Charles used to wear when we first dated. I imagined Jaden unwrapping it by the fire, his cheeks glowing with joy. Instead, I found myself holding a suitcase at the door, told I no longer belonged. Still, part of me clung to hope. I remembered Charles's letter folded in the drawer of my nightstand. I remembered the house deed tucked carefully inside a file, my name written in black ink. And I remembered the special gift I had prepared not for my children who turned their backs, but for the only one whose love remained untouched. I did not know then that betrayal could become a turning point. That night on the porch was not the end of my story. It was the beginning of a reckoning my children never expected. At first the slights were subtle, small enough for me to ignore. Mila would laugh at the handmade sweaters I gave Jaden for his birthdays, saying they were too old-fashioned. Russell stopped asking if I wanted to join family outings. Instead, he would call me afterward with a polite summary, as though I were an outsider needing updates. Danielle, once my closest confidant, began to echo her husband Kyle's indifference, excusing their absence with vague promises of next time. One evening, Mila placed a stack of papers in front of me at the kitchen table. "It's just for tax purposes," she said lightly, her manicured finger pointing to the signature line. "If you sign this, everything will be smoother." I glanced down and saw it was a quitclaim deed, an attempt to transfer the house title out of my name. My stomach tightened. I pushed the papers back across the table. "No, Mila, this house is mine." Her smile faltered, but her eyes told me she would not forget my refusal. After that, the atmosphere shifted. The locks on the front door were changed, and Russell explained it was for security reasons. I found my sewing machine and boxes of fabric moved into the basement without my permission. My place at the dinner table was quietly shifted closer to the kitchen door, away from the laughter and conversation at the center. The cruelest blows came not in grand gestures, but in passing words. "You're too old for this," Mila snapped when I offered to cook a holiday dish. "Stop clinging to the past," Russell muttered when I pulled out a photo album of Charles. Danielle, torn between loyalty and convenience, stayed silent more often than not. Each dismissal was a needle piercing deeper into my heart. I tried to endure. I reminded myself that family is complicated, that children don't always realize the pain they cause. But the signs kept mounting. Mila began to question every dollar I spent from my pension, hinting that I should contribute more to household expenses if I wanted to stay comfortable. Kyle joked about nursing homes, as if planting seeds in the minds of the others. Danielle no longer defended me. She nodded along. The breaking point arrived in the weeks leading up to Christmas. I overheard Mila on the phone telling a friend, "We'll have more space once she's out. Honestly, it's suffocating with her here." My chest clenched, and yet I said nothing. I thought perhaps I had misheard. Perhaps she meant something else. But then came the message, Russell's text, blunt and cold. "Mom, it's going to be crowded this year. Maybe stay at a motel for Christmas. Mila already booked something for you." The words glared at me from the screen. They were not a request. They were an order. I stared at the blinking lights on the tree that night, the ornaments I had collected over decades, shimmering like strangers. My name was not on the gift tags. My stockings had been left in a box in the attic. The house that once rang with Charles's laughter now echoed with a silence that screamed, I was no longer welcome. I confided in my neighbor, Mrs. Henderson, who had seen me watering the front lawn for years. She shook her head. "Loretta, don't let them treat you like this. You raised those children." I smiled weakly, but deep down I felt powerless. The final humiliation came on Christmas Eve itself. Mila handed me a sealed envelope in front of Russell and Danielle. "We thought you might like this," she said with a smirk. Inside was a voucher for one night at a budget motel near the interstate. "It'll be more comfortable for you," Russell added, avoiding my gaze. Danielle looked at the floor. In that moment, I realized it wasn't just Mila's doing. My own children had chosen convenience over me. They preferred the illusion of a perfect holiday without the inconvenience of their aging mother. The betrayal was complete. I packed what little they allowed me to keep: an old coat, some clothes, a few personal mementos, and placed them in the suitcase. As I zipped it shut, my hands trembled not from weakness, but from the storm of emotions inside me. Anger, sorrow, disbelief. And yet beneath it all there was a spark, a reminder of Charles's letter of the deed tucked safely away of the truth no one else knew. They thought they were discarding me. They thought they were erasing me from the picture. But I held something they could not imagine, a secret strong enough to shatter their cruelty and expose their greed. That night, as I walked past the glowing windows filled with laughter that no longer included me, I whispered to myself, "They will regret this." Christmas Eve should have been a night of warmth, but for me it became the stage of my deepest humiliation. The house glowed with lights strung across the porch, carols drifted faintly from the radio, and the smell of roasted ham filled the air. Yet in the middle of that cozy scene, I stood on the threshold, treated not as family, but as an unwelcome guest. Mila's voice cut through the cheer like a knife. She pressed the motel voucher into my hand, her painted nails tapping against the envelope. "It's for your comfort," she said loudly enough for the guests in the living room to hear. Her tone was sugar-coated, but her smirk betrayed the truth. This was not generosity. It was eviction, disguised as kindness. Russell stood beside her, arms crossed. "Mom, just take it. Don't make things harder than they have to be." His words carried no affection, only the cold detachment of a man who had already decided his mother no longer belonged. Danielle lingered nearby, her eyes glistening with unshed tears, but she remained silent. Kyle chuckled awkwardly, muttering something about how these things happen. The room fell uncomfortably quiet as a few neighbors and distant relatives realized what was happening. Yet no one stepped forward. No one spoke up. They simply looked away, sipping their eggnog, pretending they hadn't seen an old woman being stripped of her dignity in her own home. I tried to steady my voice. "After everything I've done for you, after all the years—" My words broke before I could finish. Mila cut me off sharply. "Don't start with guilt, Loretta. This house can't hold everyone. You'll be fine for one night." At that moment, Jaden burst from behind the Christmas tree, his small scarf trailing behind him. His little face was flushed, his eyes wide with panic. "Grandma, don't go!" he cried, rushing toward me. He clutched my coat sleeve, holding on as though he could anchor me to the family that was pushing me out. The sight of his tiny hand against my worn coat seared into my heart. I bent down my knees, stiff with age, and held him close. "I don't want to leave you, baby," I whispered, fighting back tears. But Russell pulled him away firmly. "That's enough, Jaden. Go back inside." The child's cry echoed through the hallway as he was dragged back, his arms reaching for me until the last moment. I could still hear his voice as the door slammed shut between us. "Grandma." The sound shattered me. I stood outside, suitcase at my feet, snow falling gently on my shoulders. Behind the door, laughter resumed, muffled but clear, as if my absence restored their celebration. They didn't see me as a mother or even as a human being worthy of respect. They saw me as a burden finally removed. The humiliation was complete. I was in exile at the very gathering I had once dreamed of sharing with grandchildren and in-laws. The cold wind bit into my skin, but it was nothing compared to the frost in my children's hearts. I lingered for a moment on the porch, my breath visible in the frigid air. Every memory of sacrifice, the nights I skipped meals so Russell could eat, the weekends I worked overtime so Danielle could have choir lessons, crashed over me like a cruel wave. All of it seemed erased in a single night. I lifted my suitcase, the weight heavier than ever, and stepped down the walkway. The crunch of ice under my shoes sounded like a final judgment. I walked past glowing windows filled with joy that no longer included me. For the first time in my life, I felt utterly alone. But deep inside, a different fire began to kindle. Humiliation gave way to a slow, steady anger. The echoes of Charles's warning resurfaced in my mind. "Don't let anyone push you out." They thought I was powerless, discarded, forgotten. They were wrong. That night in the bitter cold, I promised myself this would not be the end of my story. It would be the turning point. The night air was cruel, but it cleared my mind. I realized I had allowed myself to be humiliated, believing I had no power. But that belief was false. I still carried the strongest weapon of all, the truth. Hours later, while the house behind me buzzed with shallow laughter, I made a call. My lawyer, Camille Porter, answered despite the holiday. "Loretta," she said firmly, "do you still have the documents?" I nodded, even though she couldn't see me. "Yes, the deed is still in my name, and Charles's letter too." Camille's voice sharpened. "Then it's time we use them." By midnight, I was not alone. A police cruiser pulled into the snowy driveway, its headlights slicing through the holiday decorations. Officer Alvarez stepped out, his breath fogging in the cold. Camille followed behind, carrying a leather folder clutched tight under her arm. I walked back to the porch, my suitcase still there like an abandoned dog. Mila's face appeared at the window, startled. She opened the door, feigning surprise. "Loretta." "What is this?" Before she could spew another excuse, Camille stepped forward. Mrs. Gaines is the legal owner of this house. We have the deed, the tax receipts, and her late husband's letter confirming sole ownership. Any attempt to remove her from this residence is unlawful. Mila's mouth fell open. Russell came rushing to the door, his voice trembling. What? That can't be right. Camille cut him off by holding up the papers. It is right. Every signature, every stamp, every date is here. Your mother owns this property outright. You are guests in her home. Silence swept through the living room. The same relatives and neighbors who had watched me be humiliated now leaned forward, their eyes wide. Then came the final blow. Officer Alvarez played a clip from the doorbell camera that had automatically recorded their cruelty. Mila's sharp voice echoed through the speaker. The house is full. You should go tonight. The sound filled the room, undeniable. Russell turned pale. Danielle covered her mouth with her hands. Kyle muttered a curse under his breath. Mila tried to laugh it off, but the evidence was merciless. The proof of their betrayal had been captured word for word. I straightened my back, no longer the broken woman who had walked away into the snow. You threw me out of my own house, I said clearly, my voice carrying through every corner. But I will not be erased. Not tonight. Not ever. Gasps filled the air. I watched their confidence crumble. The same children who had pushed me out now stood powerless, their schemes exposed under the glow of Christmas lights. What they didn't know was that the deed wasn't the only thing I had prepared. I still carried one final gift, a gift meant not for them, but for the only soul in this house whose love was pure. The living room, once filled with laughter and the clinking of glasses, had turned to stone. The neighbors who had come for holiday cheer now stared at my children with a mixture of pity and judgment. The weight of silence was unbearable, and for once it was not pressing down on me, it pressed down on them. Camille's voice rang out calm but unyielding. Let me make this clear. Mrs. Gaines is the sole legal owner of this house. Every one of you lives here at her discretion. What happened tonight is not only shameful, it borders on unlawful eviction. If she wanted, she could have you removed by morning. Russell swallowed hard, his jaw tightening. Mom, you didn't mean... My voice was louder than I expected, steady despite the tremor in my chest. You stood there while your wife pushed me out the door. You changed the locks, you moved my things into the basement, and tonight you gave me a motel voucher like I was some stray you wanted off your porch. Don't you dare tell me you didn't mean it. Russell's face fell. Danielle sobbed quietly, tears streaking down her cheeks. Mom, I was scared to speak up. Mila. I cut in, turning toward her. She stood frozen, her lips pressed tight, her confidence shattered by the evidence laid bare. No one forced you to stay silent. You chose it. Both of you did. And now you will live with that choice. The neighbors shifted uncomfortably, some whispering under their breath. The shame in my children's eyes grew deeper as they realized their cruelty was no longer a private matter. It was public, undeniable, unforgettable. Officer Alvarez stepped forward. Ma'am, do you want to press charges for attempted unlawful eviction? I looked around the room. My children's faces, once the center of my life, were now masks of fear and regret. For a moment I considered it, but then I shook my head. No, officer, not tonight. Tonight is not about punishment. Tonight is about truth. I turned to the Christmas tree where Jaden stood trembling, clutching the hem of his sweater. His eyes were red from crying, but when he saw me looking at him, he broke free from Russell's grip and ran into my arms. I lifted him, though my back ached, holding him close, as if nothing else in the world mattered. Grandma's here, I whispered, kissing the top of his head, and I'm not going anywhere. Then from my suitcase, I pulled out a small wrapped box. The room watched in silence as I placed it in Jaden's hands. He tore it open with the eagerness only a child can have. Inside was a thick envelope and a knitted red scarf. Jaden held up the scarf, his eyes lighting up. It's just like the one in Grandpa's picture, he shouted with joy. Russell blinked in surprise, but Camille explained before he could speak. This envelope is a college savings account, a 529 plan fully funded in Jaden's name. It was created by Mrs. Gaines and her late husband. It is his inheritance contingent only on one condition, that he grows up with kindness in his heart. A murmur spread through the room. The scarf was sentimental, but the account represented years of sacrifice and planning. My children stared, realizing that while they schemed to push me aside, I had quietly secured a future for the only one who showed me love without condition. Jaden wrapped the scarf around his neck and hugged me tightly. "Thank you, Grandma. I love you. I love you too, baby," I said, my tears finally falling, not from pain, but from relief. Russell stepped forward, his voice breaking. "Mom, I don't know what to say." "Say nothing," I replied sharply. "What matters has already been shown. Words are easy, actions are harder." Mila tried to protest, her voice trembling. "This isn't fair. We've built our lives here too." Camille turned on her. Fair would have been honoring the woman who gave you this roof over your head. Instead, you tried to erase her. If fairness is what you want, Mrs. Gaines could have you out of here before dawn." Mila fell silent, her bravado crushed. Danielle sobbed harder, finally kneeling beside me. "Mom, I'm so sorry. Please don't hate me." I placed a hand on her shoulder, my grip firm but not cruel. "I don't hate you, but I won't forget. And I won't allow this again. Tomorrow the locks will change back. This is my house, and I will decide who is welcome inside." For the first time in years, I felt the ground steady beneath my feet. I was no longer the silent mother enduring insult after insult. I was the woman Charles had believed I could be, the woman who stood her ground. The guests, once awkwardly sipping their drinks, now applauded softly, not out of celebration, but out of respect. And as I held Jaden close, the red scarf draped across his shoulders, I knew the truth. I had lost my children to greed, but I had gained something stronger, dignity restored, and the promise that love, when it is pure, will endure. That Christmas night, I learned a truth I had always known, but never fully embraced. Love and respect cannot be demanded, they must be earned and protected. My children had chosen convenience over compassion, greed over gratitude. Yet I discovered that even in the darkest moments of betrayal, a mother's courage can shine brighter than any injustice. Holding Jaden close, feeling the warmth of his trust and devotion, I realized that the legacy we leave is not the house, not the savings, but the love we nurture in those who truly care. I had sacrificed for my children, but it was the pure love of one small boy that restored my faith. I understood that sometimes family fails us, but self-respect and dignity must never be surrendered. Protecting oneself, asserting the truth, and standing firm are not acts of cruelty, they are acts of love for oneself and for those who are truly deserving. That night, as the snow fell gently outside, I promised Jaden I would always be there for him. And I promised myself that I would never allow anyone to treat me as less than I am. The holidays had been cruel, but I emerged stronger, wiser, and with my heart still open to those who cherish it.